Hello, everybody. Welcome to our Monday night live stream on non-duality. Before we begin, please, if you would, let me know that you're here. Give me a like. And also in the comments, please say hello. And also, if my audio gets out of sync while I'm doing this, just say out of sync. I don't know why it happens, but it's happening from time to time. Usually at least once I have to correct this. So this is the second live stream on non-duality, third on non-duality that I've hosted here. I've been wondering if it was a good topic, and I'm seeing that it certainly is a popular topic, which at first surprised me because non-duality isn't really an entry point for most people when they begin the meditation life, or maybe they would call it the spiritual life. But that's not that it shouldn't be, it's just that it's a little bit difficult to comprehend what non-duality is if you haven't had a lot of experience in meditation. Hey, thanks. All right, John, let's get non-dual. Thank you guys for your comments, and hello, everybody. So after being in retreat with my teachers and all of my fellow meditators, hundreds of people who come together every year to practice and train with various teachers, all of the non-dual tradition, it just became clear that there may be some good sense in initiating our journey with an understanding of the goal of the journey. The journey has a goal. That's why it's a journey. And there are many ways to describe the goal of the meditative path, but you could say, it's not as exciting to describe it this way, but you could say that the real journey is to stabilize the non-dual wisdom within us. That's the goal. That's the culmination of meditation. That's also the begin. Stabilizing it that's the goal. Accessing it is the beginning of the path. And then the path that most of us are on for most of the years of our life is the preliminary to that. So the non-dual experience is what we're going for in the near term. And near term may not be that near if we don't really put ourselves wholeheartedly into it. But it is something that through training and working with people who are experts in this, qualified teachers, we can get a genuine glimpse of the non-dual ground of our being. And that glimpse can then replace the path that we were on mostly. It mostly replaces the path that we were on to get there. And then we use that glimpse as the orienting, sort of the North Star of our practice, and we learn to stabilize that glimpse. And so we'll talk about that. Any non-dual tradition, whether it's supported by Buddhist methods and teachings or Vedanta methods or teachings, it's all going to follow the same basic structure because the non-dual ground of our being is natural to us. It isn't created. It isn't a spiritual thing it's nothing unusual. Everybody has it, but most of us will go our entire lives without recognizing it or even experiencing it. It's said that everybody experiences it for a moment when they die. When their mind and their body completely separate, there's a moment of glimpsing the non-dual ground of being. But it's so unusual and it's so bright that 99.9999% of people faint and they black out. And that's where the process of the post death experience called the bardo begins. And of course, that's not something that any of us learned in school. It's just how meditation traditions sort of all come together and say, this is a part of the experience of existence. You have your life, you have the moment that you enter into the dying experience, and then you have death and everything that happens after death. And of course, as you all have probably read and studied, the time after death is not a time of reward. It's a time of feeling the impetus of all of your karmic momentum, which, we'd have to talk about another time. So, what I decided to do in September and probably part of October is arrange the most useful topics on non-duality. And this is what I think anyone and everyone who wants to get involved with non-dual practice, or whatever you want to call it, the non-dual movement, there's a certain amount of information that you really need to incorporate, because this is not our normal mode of experience. This is a very special and unusual mode of experience that is experienced by a mind that is ready and mature, and then is able to use certain methods to stabilize it. Now, we're all right now experiencing our non-dual ground of being. Very few of us are aware of that. It doesn't have any meaning for me to say that. But people who've been training, people who have practiced meditation in these traditions, will understand what that means, and they will understand that that is a dimension of every moment of experience. But it isn't an idea, it isn't a belief, and it isn't even part of our mind. It's beyond our mind. And that's why it has to be presented carefully, because if it's not presented carefully, it just becomes an idea, a powerful idea, an idea that actually can kind of invoke an altered state, just the idea, but that's not really what we want. We don't want an altered state that comes from an idea. We want to experience the nature, the true nature of what we are. And that true nature begins with understanding the teaching or the idea of non-duality and then tipping into the experience of it. So, over the next 3 or 4 or 5 or 12 live streams, I'm going to talk about this. So let's go to, all right. So tonight we're going to talk about what non-duality is. We're going to talk about both the idea of it and the experience of it, and those are important to our journey. And then in the next live stream, probably the very next one, which will probably be in a couple of days, you'll get an email alerting you to it. If you're on the list, you can sign up for the list in the description. We'll talk about how this experience is learned, because make no mistake, we are not going to just stumble on the experience of non-duality in any type of meaningful way. We could stumble upon the experience of non-duality, but we wouldn't understand what had just happened, because we don't have the tools of recognition in place. They have to be trained up. Now, in a previous live stream, I talked about, see, I think I have it here. I talked about this gentleman who is the one exception in the modern era of someone who didn't need to train it. It happened to him and it didn't go away. And because it didn't go away, he had to understand what it was. And he had the rest of his life to understand that. And of course, that would be the only legitimate example I know of in the modern world of someone who is spontaneously awakened without a teacher or a tradition. So it's possible. But it's not. It has happened, but it's probably not going to happen to us because it hasn't happened to very many people. And if it were going to happen to us, it would either already have happened and we would know that, or it's going to happen in the future. But because that would be in the future, we can't be sure that it is going to happen. So do we just wait and hope that we're the ones that win the lottery and just spontaneously experience an unwavering awakening into our non-dual nature? Or do we help it along? I would suggest that we help it along. So we're going to talk about how to learn it, and there are various interesting methods of how it is learned. Now, as you know from previous live streams or from your own reading, the notion of non-duality doesn't belong to any one tradition, but it does almost entirely originate in India. The practice, the understanding, the helpful literature, the commentaries, and all of the life examples of the thousands and thousands and thousands of people who've experienced in this way, they all came from India. And it came out of India into Tibet, into Japan, into Sri Lanka, Burma, Thailand, China, and so forth in the last 1,000 years or so, maybe a little bit before then. But it didn't come to the West until the 20th century. So in the West, although we do have people who describe themselves as non-dual teachers, we should understand that it's only been here for 70 years, and it's going to take hundreds of years for a new culture to completely integrate and unfold the teachings and the way of life that support this recognition. Now, all that means is that there is no shame, and it's actually a good idea to rely on those who've been trained in cultures that really know this stuff inside and out. The cultures that have trained me, well, the culture, is the Tibetan culture, in particular the Mahamudra tradition. So let's see, can you see that? This is for such a simple topic of non-duality, as you can see, there's a lot of stuff to learn. This is this type of text, of which there are dozens. This one is 500 or 600 years old, not this copy. This copy is relatively new. But this text has been guiding people for 500 or 600 years. And there are many texts like it, and they all pretty much read the same. They're beautiful, they're incredibly intelligent. Some of them are written so that an ordinary person like you and me can pick them up and learn from them. Others are very technical, very advanced, and they're it's like the teacher manuals that we had in school, like in math. You know, you'd have the math textbook, and then the teacher would have a special thing where it would show the exercises to give the students and the different answers students might come up with if they've misunderstood this or misunderstood that. So there are books that are for teachers, and usually those are really hard to get if you can even find them. They're usually restricted. You have to have you have to go through a rigmarole to get those. And then there are the texts that really do train us. Those are our friends. Those are not our enemies. We might have heard that non-duality is something that we can just do. We can just experience it right now. I mean, I wish it were that case. I mean, I understand what the people who teach that way And where do they teach usually? They teach on YouTube. I understand what they're doing, what they're saying, and what the basis for them saying that is. And the reason I understand that is that's how I started out. I started out with this guy and one other guy who I didn't bring his book down, Nisargadatta, back in my 20s. And I spent years just reading these books and doing what they said to do and having a non-dual experience. A non-dual experience that changed my life, definitely changed my life. But it was a conceptual experience. I didn't get that at the time. It wasn't the real thing. It was changing my life, yet it was still a very subtle thought. And when I watch people on YouTube teaching non-duality, I'll bet all the money I have in the bank, which isn't really saying much, that's what they're doing. They don't have the methods or the lineage that's going to help them make the jump from the mind into the actual thing. And the thing about it is, there's no way for us to know if we don't have a teacher. We can be in the very back of the mind experiencing a non-dual state. And we're not going to, on our own, understand that we're in the mind. It really takes someone who's actually in that state to help us out. And that's the role of a lineage teacher, someone who's trained and accomplished in that. And there's so many people like that why wouldn't we seek out their help? So, where were we? Oh, yes, we were back here. So in our next live stream, we're going to talk about how to learn it, the methods, the traditions, the stages, and so forth. And then after that, we're going to talk about how it progresses. What is it that begins the journey? And how does that begin? How do we know that we've begun the journey? What does it take to actually begin the journey of non-dual training? Can we just start right now where we are? Or is it not exactly like that? Well, as we'll see in that live stream, there are factors that when they come into play, make the journey real. And the journey then begins to progress. And the progression of the non-dual journey is crystal clear. It's very, very well mapped. And of course, it would be because as someone begins to go along that path, their mind clears and their intelligence increases and their ability to communicate carefully, accurately is just off the charts. So the descriptions of the experience that are left behind by people who are along that journey are going to be quality documents. By the way, that's what things like this are. So after that, I'm going to talk about obstacles, because there are obstacles to this. There are some obstacles that we really need to be on the lookout for in our own experience and in the world around us. Because once we start to get into non-dual meditation or the non-dual movement or whatever we want to call it, we're probably going to start spending more time reading about it, and we're going to take a strong interest in it. We're going to listen to podcasts and things like that. And a lot of interference can come into our life if we don't know how to distinguish between people who know what they're talking about and people who just sort of sound like they know what they're talking about. You really want to be careful. You also have your own inner obstacles of mistaking states of mind for states of awareness. Those are two different things. It takes a lot of experience to be able to do that, but it can be done, and it has to be done. So we have to learn how to work with thoughts and emotions and the body and our world and our life within the practice of non-dual awareness. There are challenges there, but it's exciting when you have a method, when you have a path that's supported by others who know this path well. It's exciting. It's a real hero's journey. And so we have to understand the obstacles. And when we have put in the time to actually learn this path, and we have some preliminary stability in the experience, there are ways to enhance that, which is sort of like a way of enhancement is another way of saying advance more quickly. So it would be sort of like putting an engine on a bicycle. We can move more quickly through the journey if we know how to use enhancements. And so we'll talk about that. And I will make references while we're going through this to some of the truly great texts that, like here, this is a very famous one, The Jewel Ornament of Liberation by Gampopa. So I think this is probably, 1300, maybe the 12th century. I think the 12th century. I mean, Gampopa was a total master of this type of thing and left behind a great many teaching, I guess you'd call them books, texts that you can get. And also Gampopa was the teacher of all of the teachers that came through him in what is called Mahamudra. And then there's an actual method that I teach in Finding Ground to introduce non-dual meditation. And I usually use this text right here. This text is a text on how to train the mind and how to train ourselves in our life. But it begins, it's how many slogans? It's 59 slogans. So things like all Dharma has a single purpose, be grateful to everyone. These are slogans that you train in, and they basically help you heal your confusion about how to live your life, how to make the right decisions when life throws you its challenges. So most of the 59 slogans have to do with that relative world stuff, but the first 5 slogans don't. The first 5 slogans introduce the non-dual state, and it gives you everything you need to identify it and to stabilize it and to deepen it. So we'll go over that in probably the enhancement live stream. So please tune in for that. All right. So what is non-duality? The word non-duality, I said this last time, it's kind of an uninviting word. It's kind of a theoretical sounding word. It sounds like something that our friends who are interested in French philosophy would say. Non-duality, it sounds like postmodernism or something like that. Non-duality refers to the pre-confusion, pre-mistake level of consciousness. It's the fundamental, well, as I've written here, it's the fundamental truth of existence. So existence, which means you and me, but you, we'll talk about you. Existence is not divided into this and that, here and there, self and other. It appears to be divided that way. We experience the world not non-dually, but dualistically. So non-duality, the essential meaning of it, refers to the ground of existence. This ground of existence is what meditation is aimed at. It's why one meditates. They meditate to come into full understanding of this ground of existence. This ground of existence has other names. We could call it the inseparability of emptiness and luminosity. We could call it Mahamudra. I typically call it Buddha nature or the ground of being. So those are names that refer to that, but to describe it, one way to describe it is that it is not dual. It is not two. It's fundamentally non-distorted. So When we see the ground of existence in a distorted way, when we're confused about what we are, the ground of existence, the non-dual ground, appears in a distorted manner that has a part of it that thinks that it's the seer of another part of it. So if I hold up my pen and I look at the pen, I am looking at the pen. Subject is looking at object. Subject is looking at object. Now, the experience of a subject looking at an object can either be a confused experience where the subject, me in this case, really thinks that I am something looking at something else. That's called dualistic experience or confusion. This dualistic experience can also be seen as just an appearance that doesn't have any actual division between the seeing subject and the object that's seen. A way to understand that is the way we experience things in a dream. In a dream, we may be running after a train that we're trying to catch. We are running after that thing, that train. When we wake up, we realize that there was no train. There was no one running after a train. There was no space in which that pursuit was happening. It was an appearance, but it didn't have an underlying dualistic, substantial reality. It was just an illusion. Meditators discovered at least 3,000 years ago that through a combination of strengthening and relaxing, we can penetrate directly into the ground of what we are, below the mind, and see things differently. Now, this doesn't mean that we go into a trance or some kind of intense meditative absorption. I mean, those things do exist, but it isn't necessary in this type of meditation to do that. Someone can be seeing these things. Is this AI? Yes, this is. Somebody can be seeing these things and we wouldn't know. We wouldn't be able to tell that someone is experiencing. You never penetrated anything. Thank you, Hornet. We have an idea that when we wake up or when we become enlightened or when we see the non-dual nature of things, that somehow that's going to change the outer world. And so we might have fear about that, or we might hope for that. We might hope that if we see the non-dual ground, that everything will appear magically, or it will be luminous, or we'll see gods and goddesses. That's fantasy. That's not really what anyone describes. We learn to access the ground of what we are and to see things accurately. And when we do, it liberates us from the confusion that we had been walking around with up until that point. And that's called liberation. And the experience of seeing correctly is called wisdom. If we don't access that non-dual perspective and we only ever live in a dualistic framework, that means that we're always attached to the thing that sees other things. We always live in a world where it's us and everything else. And although that seems normal to us, that's called confusion. And confusion can be clarified by seeing things accurately. And in this case, the most accurate way of experiencing the world is to see the way things truly are. And so anyway, what we'll find is that all of this revolves around the experience of meditation. All right. So the word non-duality, which is used an awful lot. I mean, remember I said a couple weeks ago that 20 years ago, we had the boom of yoga, or maybe it was 30 years ago, where something that was definitely existed in our world. I mean, I did yoga 30 years ago, but there was no yoga culture. I mean, when I would go to yoga classes, it would usually be people, I mean, honestly, the yoga classes that I went to when I was in my 20s were led by people in their 60s who were usually wearing like a leotard, and they had studied with some swami, and there was a bit of spirituality mixed in, but nothing heavy, and it was just a very gentle, deep practice. There was no athletics that I remember there at all. And, you know, maybe that was just a version that was popular back then. Maybe that's not the real yoga. I don't know. I'm certainly not an expert in yoga. But then yoga caught on, and yoga trended, and it became this huge thing, huge thing. The yoga industry just became gigantic, and it was mixed up with all kinds of interpretations of what yoga is. And there's the spiritual yoga, and there's the athletic yoga, and the power yoga, and then the super esoteric yoga, and all that stuff came out. And yoga, yoga, yoga. There was a yoga fashion industry. There were yoga studios popping up. That was kind of a new thing. And nothing. Oh, hey, Hornet. I'm not going to have time to respond to your comments. And if you have actual questions, I'd love to respond to them. Nothing's wrong with swamis. So, about 10 years after that, even though yoga was still growing in popularity, mindfulness became the new thing. And I remember some other meditation teachers and I were having a conference where someone said mindfulness is the new yoga. And we were all thinking, oh my God, because mindfulness, it's like a modern take on meditation. And people who've done a lot of traditional meditation, you know, the stuff that I keep talking about, Mahamudra and that kind of thing, that's not mindfulness practice. Mindfulness practice is kind of a modern invention. There are elements of mindfulness in traditional practice, but all right. But mindfulness is a very small element of meditation, and suddenly mindfulness was booming, and everybody was aware of mindfulness, and there were magazines about mindfulness, and morning talk show hosts were talking about mindfulness, and of course, they always get everything wrong. They always go to the lowest common denominator of anything they're talking about. And that kind of made meditation into something that attracted people who never would have been interested in meditation if they knew what meditation historically had been. And it just created a lot of complications, and meditation centers had to adapt because all these people were coming in because their therapists told them, oh, you should relax or be more mindful. So they were coming into meditation centers, which didn't really have any investment in teaching people to relax or be more mindful. Meditation centers kind of existed to help people get on the path of meditation that leads to awakening. But that's how things work. And now the new kid on the block is non-duality. And non-duality has become popular. The word non-duality is now attached to a movement, the non-dual movement. And I don't know, it's too early to really see what this is going to lead to. I'm sure there are a lot of extremely well-meaning and genuinely inspired people involved, but there's definitely going to be room for confusion and people rushing into it that haven't really put any training in it. They might not even know that there is training in it. They might not know, for example, that there are training manuals that are 700 pages long that are just considered standard training in that type of stuff. Not that every one of us has to read a 700-page book, but we would be training with people who had. So now we got non-duality. So let's just talk about what it is, what the word means. Non-duality. The Sanskrit word is Advaita. Advaita. I talked about this last week. I don't have a slide for it, but Advaita. Advaita means non-dual. So the non-dual teachings are the Advaita teachings of India. They're very, very old. They involve a lot of refinement of one's cognitive experience. It isn't something that one just pops into. It's something that one backs into over time by learning to identify the way they've become caught in dualistic experience. So the Advaita teachings are very old, and they're certainly the basis of millions and millions of people's spirituality. In Tibet, the word nyime is the same thing, but in Tibet they don't really use the word non-dual. It's not as important to them. Rather than talking about how the ground of being is non-dual, rather than talking about that, they will talk about how the ground of being is the unity of qualities which can otherwise seem dual. So emptiness and awareness, for example. So the word there is sunjuk. All right. So the word itself is attached to two very old traditions, and both of these traditions have a lot to say about the word. Neither of these traditions, in my knowledge, I'm not a super scholar in Advaita Vedanta or Vedanta Advaita teachings, but generally speaking, the non-dual teachings are given to someone when they're ready for the non-dual teachings. It can really become a problem for people if they have non-dual teachings before they're ready. It can lead to an increased confusion within dualistic experience. So, non-duality, when it's used in a teaching context, can refer to four basic things: a view, and we're going to go over each one of these, and this is tonight's live stream. A view, and I'll say what that is, what a view means, an idea, a practice, and a result. So we have the non-dual view, we have the conceptual framework of non-duality, which is important. Then we have non-dual practice, and then we have the accomplishment of the non-dual awakening, which is the result. So these might help us. So we're going to talk about view. If you study in either the Mahamudra or Dzogchen traditions, these are master systems of non-duality. I think they're the most extensive, polished, and helpful traditions of any non-dual teachings there are. I mean, I have a lot of respect for the non-Buddhist systems. That's how I started. But I don't think that they can match the Buddhist systems. That's just been my experience. And so if you read non-dual teachings from the Buddhist tradition, like these two teachers, Sonia Rinpoche and Tulku Urgyen, these two books, this is father and son, by the way, these two books are almost entirely about the view, the non-dual view. The view is the big deal in non-dual teachings. You're trying to understand and experience your own ground of being, the non-dual ground of your being. So a view it means two things. It's an orientation to reality. It can either be something that we map through concept, like we've learned. For example, if we're driving west and we're trying to get to the Pacific Ocean from the Midwest, we have an orientation that we're supposed to be following in this direction. We know this in our mind. We know I got to keep following in this direction. I look at the compass and the compass says go west, and I'm on I'm on the highway, I'm going west, and we hold this, and that's important. If we didn't have that view, that conceptual view, we wouldn't know how to guide our vehicle. We might wonder, I've been going this way for hours and I'm not at the ocean yet. Maybe I should veer off, or maybe I should go the other way. That would be just practicing without a view. That would be driving without a map. So the view means an orientation that points in a certain direction. On top of that, or beneath that, we have the view that is the actual reality. As soon as we are able to glimpse that reality, our meditation practice, our journey simplifies. Because now this would be like if we're trying to get to the ocean and we've been going through the mountains, we've gotten lost, we're not really sure where we are, but then we come up on a high pass and we look out and we see the ocean. Now we know that we're in that direction, and we just know that we're getting there, and it's a very different experience. We've glimpsed the reality of the view. So the view can be an actual experience used as an orientation or a North Star in our meditation. The early stages of our meditation training and our study, we're trying to recognize the view, the actual view. That could take years in some cases. We're getting closer and closer. We're having powerful meditation sessions, but we still have not glimpsed the actuality of the view itself. Why? Because the view of non-duality is so profound. This is much, much more profound than just understanding selflessness, for example. The experience of non-self or the experience of impermanence, also things that can completely change our life, are much easier for us to experience directly. Those can happen much earlier in our path. But the non-dual view, the actual non-dual experience, is deeper, and there are many layers of confusion that we have to navigate to actually get there. But when we do get there, and we will if we train, if we really want to do this, that's the point. We train and we ascertain or gain the view. We glimpse the non-dual reality, and it's called gaining the view. We now have the view. That then becomes, in its own way, because this is a new type of meditation once that begins, that becomes the object of our meditation. Previously, what our object would have been something either in the body or the mind. So we might have had our breath was probably our object of meditation, in and out, in and out. Or maybe the feeling of loving kindness and compassion. Maybe that was our object of meditation. We place our attention on the feeling of love. We increase it. We start thinking about lunch. We realize, I've become distracted from love, and we bring our mind back through mindfulness to the feeling of love, our object, and we continue to meditate. So whenever we're meditating with an object, we are finding the object, sustaining attention on the object, and when our attention goes away, we train ourselves to recognize this and to bring it back and place it back on the object. That's just the basic mechanics of any type of meditation. But in this deeper style of meditation, the view isn't something other than the thing that is experiencing it. So there's no longer a me experiencing my non-duality. Non-duality is the core of experience, and we have that, and we try to stabilize within that. And we use methods. That's what the whole Mahamudra and Dzogchen systems are about. We use methods to sustain that remarkable experience. But we still call it the object. It's still the object of our meditation. It just kind of means something else. So the view is the real thing. It's the actual experience. By sustaining the view, the experience of non-duality, we will burn through all of the confusion of not knowing non-duality, and eventually we will come to the result, which will be in a couple of slides. But in order to get to the actual view, the experience of the view, we have to study the view. We have to understand what it is. We have to understand why we aren't experiencing our non-dual ground of being right now. I mean, if it is our fundamental nature, why aren't we experiencing it right now? If it's here and available, why would someone say that we're not experiencing it? Well, it's a good question, and all that is sorted out by learning. We got to learn. We educate ourselves. Everyone, even the most gifted people, with the one exception of him, with the one exception of Ramana Maharshi, who, as much as I love him, I actually have a picture of him up on the wall over there. I mean, this is definitely like my favorite guitarist is Jimi Hendrix, and one of my favorite meditation masters is Ramana Maharshi. But he didn't have a teacher. He didn't have a path. He's just this completely idiot savant genius of meditation. And there's not going to be another Ramana Maharshi for quite some time, maybe once every 1,000 years. So everybody else studies and learns the kind of map of what we are. They learn the mechanism of how experience is happening from moment to moment, how confusion happens, what the fabric of reality is actually made up of. And we learn these things to guide our meditation. And then in our meditation, we go through those directly and we see for ourselves. So these aren't things that are held as beliefs. They're more like useful guidelines that we use to come into a direct experience. And once we have a direct experience, the useful guidelines are kind of shelved. Maybe we refer to them from time to time, but when we have the actual experience, we don't have to rely so much on the concepts that taught us to get to that experience. So, as I wrote, non-duality comes first as a concept, which we use our critical intelligence to understand. Our minds are not used to thinking about this level of existence. That doesn't mean that they can't do it. But most of us are not raised in an intellectual environment that goes to this dimension of the human experience. It will be new for us. The words will be new. The way of thinking will be new. And we just have to allow for that. It's also definitely the most exciting and fulfilling thing we will ever encounter. But we have to understand that we're not already good at understanding this stuff. This is going to be a little bit of a stretch at first. But once we begin to understand it, even before we've experienced the real thing, we're going to see ourselves and our lives differently. And it's really just abundant good news when we do. We see what we are as human beings. We see the confusion that we've lived with as normal. And we see the path through that confusion that we may be on, but we see that there's more. There's a path that really seems to go somewhere. And having the understanding of this journey, having an understanding of what we are, what our mind is, what our awareness is, what our fundamental nature is, it will be better than psychedelics. I can promise you that. So, the real trick of the non-dual path is identifying the non-dual experience, because part of us right now is the non-dual ground of being. It is operating right now. but we're probably not able to recognize it. We don't have the tools yet. We're very clunky. It's like when you come in during winter and your hands are freezing and they can barely move, and you're trying to put your watch on. You can't. You have to let them warm up. And then you have the use of your fingers again, and you can do all that fine detail work. We have the capacity to identify our non-dual ground, but not yet. We have to train. And it's worth it. It's worth it to train. It doesn't really take that long, and we learn so much on the way there. But we do have to train so that we can identify the non-dual state. Both identify the road to the non-dual experience as we're learning to get there for the first time, and then once we begin to enter the experiential realm, the non-dual experience is not just automatically whatever the new thing we're experiencing is. Some states of mind that meditation bring us to are kind of like before the, before the non-dual state. They aren't actually it. We have to be able to use our discriminating mind, our critical intelligence, to realize, oh, I've stopped short. This isn't it. I have to keep going. I have to relax further. I have to meditate a little bit more diligently. So learning is important here. It's highly unlikely that we're going to be able to make any genuine progress without a basic education. So there's everything that we can know, which is going to take us a lifetime, and everything we need to know, which is easy to get to. There's the need to know, and there's the everything that we could know. A book like this is everything we could know. Everything we could know is in here. Actually, we would take a few more volumes. And then books like this are what we need to know. They're more experiential. So there's that. I guess we could also call this the philosophical training of the meditator. A meditator who just wants to calm down and become more mindful, how much philosophical training do they need? None. They're not doing anything philosophical. They're not actually going to transform anything. They're using meditation methods borrowed from meditation to achieve a result that appeals to them. They want to calm down. They want to relax. They want to maybe focus more. If it works, that's great. But they don't need to study and understand things. They're not trying to fly a plane. They're just getting in a plane. A meditator that wants to go on this path and transform, they have to accept that part of that training is going to be you're going to become a philosopher. Don't worry, that doesn't mean Descartes, it doesn't mean Sartre, it doesn't mean any of that scary or boring or frustrating stuff that your friend Claude knew in college. We don't have to do that. We don't have to deconstruct, modern history or anything like that. This type of philosophical training has more to do with how we experience and what we are. And it isn't theoretical. It's just like understanding the periodic table and then getting what are they, whatever the powerful microscopes, and then actually getting in and seeing the elements. I think you can see them, right? Like you could see boron, you could see molecules of gold. Well, you have to know what to look for in order to identify that you're looking at gold. Same thing with meditation. You have to understand what you're going to be encountering through your meditation training so that when you are encountering it, you know that you are indeed encountering it and that you're meditating properly and that everything, all systems are go. So there's the view that is the experience. That's the big one. And then there's the view that prepares us for the experience. And that's the view that is a concept or an idea. Then we have non-duality as a practice. So the practice of non-duality is interesting because most people who will have a successful experience of non-dual practice will be those people who trained for some time in meditation. To expect to have real non-dual experience without having trained in meditation, I mean, it is a little crazy. I don't know how you would do it. It just meditation is purpose built for this. So when you meditate, as I said before, you're learning how to direct your attention to an object and stabilize that attention. And that's the practice of mindfulness. Mindfulness is the faculty of mind which holds to an object and prevents distraction. And so when you're training in meditation, you always have an object of meditation and you're directing your attention to it. And that language, or that structure of meditating on something, is what your experience of meditation is built on. When you get into non-dual practice, everything changes, because now the thing that we're meditating on is the very essence of what we are. It isn't somewhere else. It's so intimate that there is no here or there. It's the core of what we are. So we're learning how to identify and experience ourselves and then sustain that experience, which means that we're experiencing ourself and then we're not experiencing ourself. How could that be? Well, that's actually been pretty much every moment of our life up until that point. The first moment where we experience our non-dual nature is the first time we've ever actually experienced ourselves. That's why it's such a groundbreaking event in our life. Sometimes it's called seeing our own face for the first time. The word, Nondual, I think that's a Tibetan term. It means recognizing our own face or looking at our own face. We have not developed the capacity that exists within us as a potential to see what we are at the same time that we're seeing all the stuff in the world. Awareness can go out at the same time that it can go in. For some of us, every time we look at something, we're aware that we're looking at it. We look at something, but we also know that we're seeing something. So awareness has an outer-facing aspect and an inner-facing aspect. This is called self-knowing, or rongrik, self-knowing. Many people, usually not meditators, but there are some meditators who spend some time in this stage of development. They only have this. They don't have this. This is this part that sees themselves and experiences that is aware of experience has become covered over and dim. When people are habitually angry, when people are habitually extremely desirous, or they're habitually distracted and fantasizing, the inner-facing part of awareness dims to the point where it's, to all intents and purposes, turned off. Now, it can't ever really be turned off, but it can be sort of not noticed. Like, you know how they call it nose fatigue? I used to be a coffee roaster way back in the day, and we would roast coffee, and we would smell it to determine if the roast was right, or we would have different sets of beans that we'd be roasting, and we would be smelling the beans to determine how to blend them. But after a little while, everything smelled the same, or you couldn't smell anything because Your nose was it was overwhelmed. It couldn't smell anymore. You had nose fatigue. So you would have to take time off, go into a separate part of the building and do some other work and let your nose come back to life. Then you could go back in and actually smell things. Well, that's a little bit what happens when we don't learn to pay attention introspectively. We almost lose the capacity to be introspective, which can lead us, well, not us, but it does lead people, probably not people who'd be interested in this type of live stream, to form ideas that there is no such thing as introspection, that awareness is the same thing as the mind or the thinking, that there is nothing other than thinking. It's crazy and it doesn't make any sense, but to them it's the only experience they have. So this dual firing mechanism, every time I'm aware of this, I'm also aware that I'm aware of it. That's not happening for everyone. Meditation can bring it back to life in someone who doesn't have it happening naturally, but most of us do. Meditation begins to increase the power of this side of experience. By the way, please type any questions you have in the comment section. It's this inner seeing that we use for non-dual practice. This inner seeing sees, but it doesn't see something else. It sees itself, which language doesn't really work very well here. It's a seeing that doesn't have an object. And that is the experience we're cultivating. Now, that isn't that self-knowing experience, that awareness without an object is not the same thing as, I think we went back here, as the view, the actual experience of our non-dual ground. It sounds like it. This sounds like, oh, maybe that's the actual experience. No, it isn't. It's the first step in a staircase. Where are we here? Practice. But the non-dual experience depends on us making this part healthy. So we have to become familiar. We have to learn how to be self-aware and to let go of preoccupation with the stuff that our outward-facing awareness is contacting. So when I'm self-aware, I can still see the stack of books, but if I'm meditating in a non-dual way, my visual perceptions are still there, but they're not receiving any extra attention. They're just appearing. And most of the attention is being pulled in to the inner-facing awareness. Now again, that's not enlightenment or anything like that. That's just an ordinary, mundane faculty that we have. But that's the beginning of this style of meditation. And although I'm saying that it's not enlightenment, it's definitely not enlightenment. It's not the true non-dual view. Just this inner-facing awareness, once it's sustained, will free us from certain levels of confusion which have ruined our life. There's much deeper levels of confusion to be freed from, but these preliminary things will change our life. And there are entire schools of meditation set up just to do that, just to maximize this inner-facing awareness. They call this reversing the flow of mind. That's the beginning of non-dual meditation. And just that beginning can lead us to the experience of subtle impermanence and non-self. And we can acquire what's called stream entry, which is an amazing accomplishment an incredible accomplishment. I mean, one of the accomplishments that the Buddha talked about, and the Buddha didn't waste time with the small stuff. So just turning the mind back on its own is going to change our life, and we have to learn how to do that. So that's when we begin to use the idea view, the view that is an idea or an understanding, to orient us, and we learn how to sustain that introspective flow. So this is how it begins. Now, there are deeper layers of practice, but how much to talk about? I mean, if we're not stable in this fundamental, this one that's looking back, if we're not stable in that, there's not a whole lot of need to confuse ourselves with deeper things. We can certainly study them, and we have big books like Moonbeams of Mahamudra to help us do that, but we don't want to get ahead of ourselves. The stakes are very high, and even these preliminary experiences that point us in the direction of our non-dual ground will change our life, and those will make, is that the purpose of pointers? What's that mean? Magnanimous man. I love that. Wait, yeah, magnanimous man. Say more of what you mean, pointers. So we'll talk more about these practices, especially when we get to how it progresses. But just that's a big one. That's worth its weight in gold. So now we're going to talk about non-duality as a result. The big result of non-duality is called non-dual awakening. Non-dual awakening, pointer exercises. Magnanimous man, I'm not sure that I know what you mean, pointer exercises. Okay, yeah, like headless way. I remember that text. Headless way. Yeah, I think that this what I'm talking about here. Now, forgive me, but I haven't seen the headless way text, God, since I was like 18 years old. But when I read it, I just blew my mind, which is its point, right? And it is if I remember correctly, the headless way is it's like a style of this, of learning to look back and seeing that there's nothing there. There's this panorama of visual and sensory experience, but when awareness looks back, there's actually nothing there, and this is called having no head. So yes, I think that these are similar to that. I think that they're perhaps the same exercises. And if that is an inspiring path for you, definitely check out the Mahamudra material. That you would probably be someone who really digs that. It's very similar, but it's extremely, it's very well presented, and there are thousands of masterful teachers who come from traditions that just do that. So, non-dual, you're welcome. Non-dual awakening essentially means that when we spend enough time investigating the subjective side of experience, we pass through that to the point where subject and object, they don't collapse or go away or anything like that, but they're seen. And they're seen by something that isn't separate from them. So it's not a new subject seeing these two things as an object. Our mind, when we talk about this experience, almost demands that we apply those terms. Oh, that's just a new subject then. So that's the new self. No. That's just that's the limitation of the mind. The mind can only talk in that way. So we have this I see this That's our daily life experience. But when we begin to reverse the flow of mind, we come to a place where we are now seeing that dualistic operation in real time. And it's in us. It's part of our experience. It's not separate from the awareness of it. It's hard to put into words, but when you're experiencing it and sustaining that experience over months and months of meditation, you get your feet and you just start seeing that, my God, that's how things are. That is the beginning of non-dual awakening. The non-dual awakening has to do with stability in the non-dual experience. At first, it's just a glimpse that fades, and we repeat that glimpse as many times as we can throughout our life. But at some point, those glimpses begin to stabilize themselves, and we have longer periods in the non-dual state. And that's where we start talking about awakening. It's a very, I squirm when I talk about this, because we as a new culture to this are so eager to apply the term awakening to whatever little experience we've had. And that's why you have so many YouTube channels where people talk about their awakening, or they even have like channels like What Life is Like After Awakening. I promise you, that's not awakening. That's just a glimpse. That's probably at the level of a conceptual view, not the real view. It is an accomplishment. It is life-changing, but that's not awakening. That's getting ready for the path to awakening. So we got to be careful there. But there are two types of sort of non-dual awakening experiences. There's the final one, and that's like what is, I keep bringing up the same books, but I'll just say Mahamudra and Dzogchen are pathways to this final, complete, and utter awakening, which is the same thing as Buddhahood. Buddhahood, complete and total awakening. The Sanskrit for that is Samyak Sambuddha, which is complete, unsurpassed awakening. It's the final thing. It is the full potential of a human being. And that's the final thing. That's the final non-dual awakening. And that means that we have stabilized completely within the recognition of emptiness, shunyata, or the Tibetan is tongpa. That's a big deal. That is, I'm not even sure where this fellow was on that spectrum. I mean, there have been a handful of people that I've learned about and studied in the last 100 years who are thought to have actually gotten there. Most meditation masters are nowhere near that state, yet they're still meditation masters. I am not even one of those, by the way, just to be clear. But that type of final experience of the non-dual ground of emptiness is the big non-dual awakening. But it isn't the only non-dual awakening that matters. When we begin our path, we won't probably be able to get into that level of experience because there are just these clouds of obstacles and obscurations that our confusion has been piling up since the beginning, and we have to wear those away. And then the final light will kind of shine through. But in the meantime, we have what's called the preliminary awakening, or the preliminary experiences, which happens when we stabilize within the subtlest layer of consciousness, kind of the backdrop, the knowing backdrop of what we are. It's not the same thing as the wisdom even behind that, but it is so refined and so stable that it allows us to dissolve some of the most important obstacles we have, such as the feeling that we the feeling that we exist as a self. So by having the preliminary non-dual experience where we're resting in the backdrop of the mind, which is called clarity or selwa, it's not the same thing as emptiness. It's just one step more impure than that. But when we are stable in that, we will see through the illusion of self. We will see through the illusion of permanence, and we will sever the conditions which keep us suffering. It's an enormous accomplishment. And like I said earlier, hey, nice to meet you. Sorry, the Daro? Nice to meet you. We will sever the habitual tendencies to be confused by resting in this preliminary non-dual state. Now, the reason this preliminary non-dual state is so worth knowing is that is where we will begin our journey and know beyond a shadow of a doubt that all of this is real. When we are resting or recognizing our clarity, our selwa, we will be having experiences that absolutely confirm the stuff that we've been studying and learning about. And this is well within our reach. This is something that if you begin training, especially if you've already been meditating, you're probably, really ready for this type of practice. And if not, you can just get yourself in shape to do this by learning meditation, especially if you start with a non-dual tradition, like Finding Ground, for example. But you can experience clarity and learn to sustain the experience of clarity and snap the things or sever the things that bind you to confusion. It isn't the same thing as attaining full Buddhahood, but that's okay. We got to take our time. I mean, this is quite a journey, and frankly, full Buddhahood would blow us apart, I'm sure. This is not something that we should just expect is going to fall into our hand. We can work toward this preliminary non-dual experience, and I promise you, when you look at all the people online that are very convincing and they're talking about their non-dual experience, they're talking about this preliminary non-dual experience. That's what they're talking about. Making the jump from the preliminary to the final. There's other stuff that has to happen there, and you really do need teachers who understand that. It's not just going to happen on its own. It just isn't. So it's important that we have some humbleness about the whole thing, because what we can attain by just learning the preliminary approach to non-duality is going to utterly transform our life. It's going to seem to us like enlightenment. That's why it's important to have teachers to talk us down. Yes, you have transformed, but there's more. There's more. So the journey is long and life is short, so it's best not to waste too much time. So the two we're about done, by the way, and then we'll sign off and we'll all have dinner. I'd invite you over here, but Dadarao is from India, so that was going to take him some time to get here. So we'll all eat separately tonight. The two roles of non-duality in a meditator's life. When a person, probably through meditation practice and study, has developed a mature perspective on life and death and suffering, they begin to understand how their confusion tries to stabilize itself by fixating in a dualistic way. This isn't something that is visible to someone who hasn't meditated. I mean, it might be a little visible, but a meditator is going to see it. They're going to have a very clear perspective, seeing it in action. And they're going to feel like, why do I keep fixating and clinging and grasping an experience when all it does is cause more confusion and suffering? And so they take a leap and they let go. Now, what they're essentially doing, remember this? They're investing in this. They're reversing the flow of the mind. And in order to do that, they have to let go of what they're holding on to. You can't hold on to things and reverse the flow of the mind. It's one or the other. So they're trusting that it's safe and sane to let go, and they're relaxing toward their awareness. This happens as we mature in our life and become more realistic, more authentic, more intelligent. And this happens primarily through meditation practice combined with study. When we continually do this, when we release ourselves from suffering and rest in that ground of clarity within us, we will have what some meditators call our first genuine aha, our first aha moment. We will see something about ourselves which doesn't seem possible. It just doesn't seem possible. But the part of us that is experiencing it is a more legitimate part of ourselves than the part of us that is doubting it. And we're making that distinction. We have upgraded our experience. We are now experiencing the higher, deeper levels of intelligence called prajna, or meditative intelligence. We're seeing something about reality that is only possible to see when we've released ourselves from fixation and clinging and are able to abide, trusting in that ungrasped, unfixated state. We have this aha, we see this glimpse of reality, and that initiates a deeper path. So the primary role that non-duality has in a meditator's life is that when they actually glimpse it, their life changes. It's a big change, but it isn't a change that's going to be visible to people around you. I mean, if they watch you over time, like if they look at the 10 years before and the 10 years after, they'll see that, wow, you really seem to get yourself together at that point. You really seem to be much clearer and more available and a lot kinder and funnier and kind of fearless. And you had good judgment after that point. They're just going to list off all the positive things that began to show up in our life after that. But we're not going to walk around with an aura. We're not going to suddenly say a few things and have money pour down from the heavens. It's not that type of thing, because this is real, and all of that manifesting stuff is a little questionable, or a lot questionable. But this has 3,000 years of track record. This is real. So the most important thing about the non-dual experience is that it shifts our life and makes a much deeper path, a deeper meaning possible. It just opens up, and probably we're going to leap into it. We're not going to have much hesitation at that point. Let me think about what I was thinking when I wrote this down. The previous one, this one, a mature perspective is cultivated through meditation practice and makes the non-dual experience possible. And this is like fruit ripening on a tree, eventually dropping. It's ready. Meditation does this. But there's also another way that non-duality comes into our life. And this it's important to talk about it because it's real, but it's also important to just, you got to be careful around this stuff. Teachers of a certain caliber, teachers who authentically hold lineages of doing this, and the only two lineages I'm aware that do this are Mahamudra and Dzogchen. And there are hundreds of qualified teachers. They're all of them at this point in history are Tibetan. I just have to be honest with you. There are a lot of excellent meditators who are Western, who are students of those Tibetan teachers, but I am not aware, and I am aware of many, many excellent Western teachers, but I am not aware of any of them who are as qualified as their Tibetan teachers. So, with that said, there are teachers who have been trained in helping a meditator suddenly recognize the non-dual ground. And when I say this, I mean the actual wisdom ground. There are methods that exist in our world where a teacher can, it usually takes time. Like, you have to get to know them, and they have to get to know you, and you have to prepare yourself through meditation, maybe a couple of years. But when you are ready, they can help you recognize this non-dual ground. You are having a legitimate experience of your awakened nature. And then it closes back up because you have to do the work now, but you've seen that it's real, and something happens in here. Something wakes up. You long for that reality. You know that it exists, and you also know that someone else knows that it exists. It's actually lots more than just that one person, but you know that that person knows that this exists, and you know that it exists, or that it's real. And you develop a tremendous respect for your teacher, or any teacher who can teach at this level. This is the fastest way to this. And it exists in the Mahamudra tradition, and it exists in the Dzogchen tradition. And anyone, any of us can go and train in those traditions and request this instruction. It's called Introduction to the Mind's Nature. And you request it, and some teachers give it freely, and some teachers tell you to do this first or study this first and then come back and talk to me in a year or whatever. But it is something that is out there. You'll certainly see a lot of it. It's usually called pointing out instructions, and it isn't something to rush after, because if you try to get it before you're really ready, it can set you back enormously. Why? Because you'll be grasping after something which should only be presented to you when you understand how not to grasp. So, this is the sort of thing that all of our, like, Star Wars and The Matrix and all of those types of stories are built around this, where there's the mentor that shows or introduces the student to the blazing reality within. It's real. That's the real tradition. That's why Tibetan Buddhism is so frickin' powerful, and it's available to you. That said, almost all of my friends have had this instruction. Everyone's had the pointing out instruction. And a lot of those people come to my retreats. I mean, and I don't give that instruction. I'm not that's way beyond my pay grade. But what I'm saying is that people get these instructions, they get this glimpse, and then they return to basic practice. And they're like, God, now I really want to do this path properly. And it just grows in them. It just grows. It might not be something that everyone can re-experience at will. I mean, that's the idea, that You're introduced, and then you know how to get back there. And that legitimately happens for some people. But if it doesn't happen, that's okay. It starts to develop in here, in your heart. And that is powerful. And that will put you on the path so that you really train yourself properly and develop that mature perspective. And then that teaching that you got from that teacher will just emerge at some point, and you will understand. But that is not enlightenment. That is the beginning of the path to enlightenment. And this stuff is all deep and worthwhile, but it isn't just something that you just do in a weekend. And I want to just encourage anyone who watches this live stream to understand the stakes are so much higher than that. Do this the real way. Don't do this just with an influencer who thinks they've had an awakening. Do this with someone who's verified, someone who holds a lineage. Go to a Mahamudra teacher if you want to see what it's all about, or a Dzogchen teacher, but go to a real one. Google them. Make sure that you know who their teacher was and who their teacher's teacher was, and know what other people say about them, because any legitimate teacher is going to have a very, very traceable lineage. And if that's not your cup of tea, then come to our next Finding Ground meditation workshop, which happens every month. And there's even a little discount code for those of you who want to do a retreat this month. It's in the description, and I'd love to see you there. But let's finish up. Oh, we are finished. This was fun. This was a little bit longer than I thought to go. It's because I'm not used to using slides. I'm just not a slide kind of guy. But I knew that if I didn't put all of this stuff into some form, I would just ramble, and I might not get to the things that were important to get. But you know what? Look at this. I mean, this is not like me. These are my notes. And that's just one page. There are all these other pages just of stuff that I've sketched out so that I make sure to cover what is important. We have some really interesting stuff coming up. Tonight was just kind of let's put it in context. Let's just make sure that when we're listening to non-dual, this present presentation on non-duality, that we're talking about the full thing, the real thing, the thing that has, legitimate provenance. And we will get to more interesting stuff, particularly how is it learned and how does it progress. That's going to be exciting. I think you'll really like that. And then when we get to the obstacles and enhancements, that's going to be kind of hair-raising for a lot of us. Both in oh my God, I'm glad I heard that, because there are mistakes we can make, which we don't have to make, but we could easily make, which take us off the track and cause us to just spin our wheels for the rest of our life, and then our life ends, and we weren't on that path. And the path is valuable because, remember, at that last moment of life, the non-dual ground opens up. And if we've been training in recognizing that in our life, even at just the level of clarity, well, death is a very different thing for us then. Thank you, Jackie. And then the enhancements that we'll talk about in that final one, or at least a few down the road, those are exciting. How to enhance this path, that's where we really get into some stuff that will inspire us and motivate us to learn more and do more. So that's it. Thank you all for joining. Thank you for your comments. Thank you for your thumbs up and all of that. I hope to see some of you at our meditation retreat. We have them every month. We actually get into these non-dual. There could be. I'm not going to get involved with policing those, but Leah, I think you could do that. Anyway, I'd love to see you at these retreats. If you want to actually dive into practice, we have a way of bringing us into this. It ripens you. It will inform you. It's definitely set up for this very path. And so, Thursday, see you all then, and thank you all for coming. Au revoir.